we were just going on this ambitious feeling like, we're gonna do it.
It gets really complex. It kind of almost spun out of control.
Okay, back to the drawing board. Yeah, it seems still surreal in my brain.
Cuphead is a game that would not at all feel out of place looking like this. It's a game that is unquestionably unique, and if you've seen even a short clip of it, you'll understand why. The hand-drawn 2D animation, jazz soundtrack, and strict adherence to its 80-year-old aesthetic all coalesce into an authentic 1930s experience. The team behind it, Studio MDHR, had never made a game before, but the two brothers leading the operation, Chad and Jared Moldenhauer, didn't let their lack of formal training get in the way.
Yeah, it's always been the goal, like just a long-running thought since kids to be like, what if one day we could make a game, if we could form a company together somehow? And then the opportunity arose, and yeah, that's the gist of it.
And we took baby steps throughout the progression of the game to arrive where we're at today. But we started it with the intention of just both of us wanting to make a game. Just a background of our entire lives studying video games and film and being very analytical about everything. And that would be our kind of self-trained.
It is more self-taught.
Yeah.
The first half of the entire development, I was full-time construction and then coming home to work on the game.
I think deep down we just wanted to make a game that we really liked. We were just hoping other people would like it. We weren't too nervous because there was a chance that maybe people didn't like that type of game or didn't really love the style. And we knew that going in, so it was more of just let's release this and see what happens and just sit back. Even if people said this is not a game I ever want to see being created, we still believed in it so much that we were going to finish it. So there was definitely no anxiety or nervousness. There was just curiosity. I think it's more curiosity, just of what people would say.
And it was that curiosity of what the game could be that put them into some tough positions. When the brothers realized that they needed to expand the scope of the game, decisions were made to remortgage their houses and leave both their current jobs.
We started out the game like wanting it to be small, and as we got more reception, the 2014 reception, we were like, okay, let's make the game slightly bigger, and we hired 2 more people. But it wasn't really until 2015 E3, like the reception from that is when we started discussing, should we kind of go all into this? Like, what can we do?
It's risk within reason. Like at first it was just the money that you could put aside and go, I think we can complete a game at this size. We have this scope that we would like to do, but let's first like make a game, get out there, and see what we can do after. But we always wanted to make the bigger version. Like we essentially never would have if you sat us down and said, here's what the budget and here's what the money you're gonna need, here's what you're gonna have to go ask the bank, why don't you try to do this? I would have went, yeah, no, I think I'm just gonna pour some more concrete and see what happens with that. We put as much humanly possible as we can in. And the city's like, when's that money coming back? We need some of that. I still haven't paid my property tax in years. And I'm like, I will pay it all, and my fines. Sorry, we had to take a chance.
Developing a game with no past experience, taking out loans against their own house, and hoping that people would like it sounds stressful enough. But as we all know, Chad and Jared took it one step further with Cuphead's animation. Creating a game that is completely hand-drawn is no easy task for a major studio, let alone 2 brothers who have never made one before.
We always joked about a 1930s style because it was just going to be 3 of us and I was going to be doing all the animation. I have 0 training in it. So we said, it would be so cool if we could do the animation like this, but let's stay away from it because we could never pull it off. And that's why we went down this other route of like testing all these. It was actual simpler styles to see.
Absolutely. Like one concept was that you would go through all of the art of an elementary school. So each world would be crafts or art. So like kindergarten would have more things like a Thanksgiving turkey that is like a painted hand print with like cotton balls and things attached. And then we would do mixes of like animating some things and stop frame animation for others. Yeah, I really liked the concept, but definitely the 30s style spoke to us more. And we were like, if we're gonna put in all the work, we may as well go with something we're more interested in at this point, or have been for a long time, than a more experimental elementary school progression.
And then when we came back around and showed our friends and peers, it was like a shoe-in to use that style, so we dove in.
To understand the Moldenhauer's love for the 1930s, you have to go back nearly 80 years, to when animators like the Fleischer Brothers and Ub Iwerks were doing anything and everything to make each of their cartoons more wild and creative than the last, to when characters had rubber hoses for limbs and little regard for the laws of physics. These were the cartoons that laid the groundwork for the animation industry, and for Chad and Jared, became the main inspirations behind Cuphead's visual style.
Everything in the game is done classically, for the most part. So everything's hand-drawn on paper, it's hand-inked on paper. All the backgrounds are watercolor paintings, and some places they're actual physical models. And all the music, of course, is like live recorded big band tunes. So from the get-go, we wanted to make sure, that was our mission, to make sure we could create this game, but try to make a game as if they were making it in the 1930s instead of relying too heavily on digital tricks or shortcuts. So we draw it, it gets inked, we scan it into the computer, and then the one cheat we used is that we color it digitally, because we actually did a test where we inked on a cell and painted on the back with gouache, scanned that in, put it in the game side by side to see, and if we painted it perfectly, you couldn't really tell the difference between digital coloring and the hand painted, so we decided to shave 5 years off the development time. That's kind of basically the art process, and then once it gets handed off to the development team, there's still a major step where the production team has to make a chart similar to a chart they would use in an animation feature, and they have to go through and set up all of the animation and make sure it plays in order. It gets really complex. There's a lot of extra work that goes in even after all of the art's complete. We had to create our own formulas for how we were going to do, using anticipation from animation and how we were going to use that within video games, but they cross pretty seamlessly a lot of places. And the old style of animation had a lot of looping and other tricks they used, which ports beautifully to video games.
But despite the outstanding animation and authentic look of the game's difficulty became the main focus among fans and journalists alike. But while designing Cuphead, Chad and Jared weren't thinking about making concessions based on how hard the game became. In fact, they hardly had that on their minds at all.
Sometimes, like anything when you're doing something creative, like when he's drawing a character, or when he was doing Cuphead, he did thousands and thousands of versions of it, and some of them are just so bad, you have to just kind of look at it and smile and toss it away.
You had some grander ideas that we could never even pull off.
Yeah, there was this one that would tie into the music, which was a lot more complicated because it'd be like you're fighting on stanzas, and the actual song playing is like the bullets and the enemies coming out. But it would have to work so that it's not the same thing every time, otherwise it's just a memorizable pattern. So when we talked about the logistics of it, it would have to have so many different variants of the song while making sure that the song is actually playable.
And, and syncs up to everything.
Yeah, you could have set something up and then just randomly had things come out, but to keep adjusting it would have taken us a long period of time. It'd be really cool, but it would probably have taken us three full bosses worth of time. We were just like, maybe not.
Typically, if you see a cartoon-themed game, it's maybe aimed at younger children, or yeah, exactly. You're gonna sit around and play this on a Saturday morning, but we didn't set out to do that. It's almost like a side effect that the art style actually has drawn other people who would never play this type of game towards it and really like it. And at the same time, people who think they're gonna come play just an easy kind of, small, neat experience.
But I think that's the best part is to enjoy certain sects of difficulty is just a natural thing. Everybody feels the satisfaction from winning but some people need the challenge a little bit steeper to get it. I do always personally feel too, if it's just that one step harder, when it's finally done, like you find yourself like cheering or actually animating and being like, it's over, never again. Like, so that's part of like the design to me was, that's what I believe some of the old games had. So to bring that to a new generation, to give them that feeling of overcoming something challenging. And I personally don't think Cuphead's that far off. It's not old school in any which way. Like, if you said you start with 3 men and 3 continues and you have to beat the game, I would have been like, it's a little 8-bit.
Well, even the original Super Mario Brothers is not an easy game. If you haven't played retro games before, it's...
Oh my gosh. No, I can't imagine anybody beating Mario 1. Like, if you handed that over to them, and they'd see the game over screen probably on the first level, if they hadn't played a platformer, and they'd just be like, this is the cheapest, meanest game alive. Whereas I'm really glad that the aesthetic is so strong for us that it actually made people be like, but I want to see what comes next. And what I find is most people are better. I think a willingness is a different thing than like a difficulty. Like, I would say Battletoads is past the point of difficult because it's not reactionary. And it's an entire memorization to have a chance to say, like, I did it.
But I think at the same time, difficult games aren't for everyone.
No,
That's the thing.
absolutely.
We weren't, honing in on it, make sure we make a challenging game.
We just wanted to make something authentic for that era. And then Run and Guns just felt like it was one of those like underrepresented genres. Like, there are good games within it, but like outside of Contra and Metal Slug and Gunstar Heroes, how many others can you name? Within that, I was like, I'd like to up that genre and have more credentials for it to be like, there are fantastic games, there are Gunstar Heroes, and somehow get our name, Cuphead, tossed in.
It's definitely not something we set out to make, but it's incredible now. Like, to even be named like, hey, Contra's a cool game, but Cuphead's also up there with Contra's, just...
Yeah, it seems still surreal in my brain.
Yeah.
Like, I can't attach myself to what that is. I'm almost to like just a slight one step away where people are like, Cuphead is one of the better run and guns. And you're like, huh.
Yes.
I'll tell my grandkids or something. I think that's the time when it'll snap, and then I can be like, come look at this chart. That's a runs and guns. And they'll be so proud of Grandpa.
Chad and Jared might have a grand tale to tell their descendants, but they aren't the only people on the team that share the Moldenhauer name. There's a very strong sense of family within the studio, and that's not hyperbole. A good chunk of Studio MDHR is comprised of the Moldenhauer relatives, as well as close friends.
Well, we have, so myself, I'm the art director. My wife is the producer and inker on the game. And of course we have Jared as the lead designer. Ryan Moldenhauer is our cousin, and he's like kind of master of everything.
Yeah,
he was
everyman.
For the largest portion of the end of the project, he was running all the production art. Tyler Moldenhauer is our other cousin, which is, he was doing all the coloring in the game, and like a few other, wearing a few other hats. It's really, really cool that like we have family members working on a project and we all get along super well.
It also isn't like randomly pulling from any family member to like build a family team. It was also the people who we played games with. Chad, I, Ryan, Tyler, the amount of times we spent on a couch in the basement playing things and talking about ideas. It's like a perfect mix because you don't have as much confusion between, let's say, two people who know a lot about something, at least need to like learn to understand how each other communicates or what they kind of their pros and cons are. But since we all know each other and have like shared so much time growing up together, it's just far easier.
And it doesn't really feel like you're working together.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like feels like the old days. We were just talking around, brainstorming ideas.
Chris Madigan, the musician, like he grew up 5 or 6 blocks down. So we played games together our whole life. He went on to be
a jazz master,
yeah,
classically trained percussion.
It was just an easy mix because we knew we want a jazz soundtrack. We need somebody who we know we can trust who also understands what video games sound like. So we gave him the reins.
It was baby steps for him too, because originally the game was going to be 8 bosses.
Yeah.
We said we just need 8 tracks, and he said, oh, that's manageable, but it kind of ballooned into over 50 tracks. Some people even haven't noticed. There's multiple mixes with different solos on all the tracks. So even when you play a boss again, you'll hear different solos and the song is slightly different. But when we approached Chris and said we wanted like these, short video game tunes, the jazz side of him really wanted to finish the song. So as long as the song sounds like it fits in the game, we'll kind of let Chris have his leeway. But it led to a much better soundtrack in the end, even if you don't hear it, the whole song through a play. It's almost like its own experience to listen to the music after.
And if you're gonna go that crazy too, like with the animation and being like everything's gonna be a watercolored background, we'll carve structures out of styrofoam and paint it, and then set up rigs to get like a full set of photos to create a 3D object, that it also wasn't that much of a stretch when he's like, well, what if I finished these songs? What if I made them longer than needed, obviously?
Once we got into it, it kind of took over. Like, make sure this is like perfectly done the old way. Let's pile on more work so it's more authentic, and it kind of almost spun out of control.
Clearly though, things worked out beautifully for them. The only thing that seemed to spin out of control was the popularity of the game, with Cuphead selling more than 1 million digital copies in the first month of release. But now that the brothers have made their dream game, what could possibly be next for the team?
I think the key thing is just we get to keep making games, and that's kind of what we got. That was our dream goal going into this whole thing, and now we get to continue making games, and we just have to take some real time.
We need some time to actually make a plan, set back. I know the appropriate thing that a company does is you're working on a second game before you're done launching, but we were 100% focused. It's not like we had meetings and sat down and discussed what the next game's gonna be and how we're gonna work with it. So we got a lot
to talk about and think
catch
about.
Up and do. We were like, what did I avoid for the last year? And then you're like, oh yeah, yard work doesn't do itself. It still feels really busy. It's just I finally can do a break of different things. But it's really exciting to have a fan base now and an audience who appreciates
it's amazing.
2D. And yeah, that's one thing that was also like a slight goal, was to be like a company again that employs people in 2D art.
Classical 2D animation. Yeah, I think that's going to be, as long as we can run it, that's one of our main goals. No matter which way you approach it, it's still more expensive to go the classical animation, especially if you do everything onshore. So it's a double-edged sword. Like, is the company going to take a risk when they know that there's digital methods that can speed up the process and save a ton of money? It's hard.
Yeah, I don't know enough about the industry. I can't speak to it on that sense to be like, I'm projecting a 5% increase this year on 2D, and I'm hoping to see 25 by 2020. But if that happened, that would be like the most rewarding thing about making the game, was if anything was inspired to be like, produce another 2D cartoon, or other studios open up to make games with animation. I would be very happy if we could somehow claim that that was us, but I don't know, we'll see.
If nothing else, the game has inspired people from around the world to share their love for the characters and for old cartoons themselves. Handcrafted art tends to have a certain level of intimacy involved with it, and whether it's a painting, a sculpture, or a little cartoon man with a cup for a head, you can feel the humanity behind it. Behind the brushstrokes or the fingerprints embedded into the clay, or in Cuphead's case, the scratchy inkwork that outlines the characters. And we see that same intimacy within Studio MDHR themselves, a close-knit group of people simply wanting to make a game that they themselves would love. We may never see another game that looks quite like Cuphead, but that's okay, as long as people see it and use it as inspiration for their own improbable pursuits. Besides, What's another 80 years wait?